Visual supports are most effective when we plan for them and implement them with fidelity and consistency. Visual supports can sometimes require a significant amount of upfront preparation time and resources, and we want to make sure that the visuals we are creating will be effective in supporting student success. Let's talk through some of these considerations when planning for visual supports. Think carefully about your daily routines within your classroom. Think about your whole class as well as individual students that may require more intensive support. What time of day feels the most disorganized or chaotic within your school routine? What skill or routine requires a large amount of adult support for students to be successful? Think about those times when you are providing multiple verbal cues to students, or perhaps answering multiple questions about what they should be doing next or how they should be completing the task. If a specific activity or routine comes to mind, this may be an area that a visual support could be effective. Once you've identified a problematic or chaotic routine, think about how the target skill or routine should ideally look. What are the behavioral expectations for that routine? How can you convey the necessary information to the student or students in a visual format? Do you need a simple visual cue or visual boundary? Or perhaps a visual schedule would be most appropriate. Are you seeking to support a single student or a whole group of students? Where and how will the visual support be displayed? Will you need to find a space within the classroom for all students to access? Or will it need to be portable so that a single student can keep it with them as they travel throughout the school environment? When you have decided on the type of visual support you're going to provide, it's time to think through the format of that visual support. It can be helpful at this point to think about the attributes of your student. If they are a fluent reader, it may be appropriate to provide the information in words or phrases. If they are a non-reader or more of a concrete thinker, symbols or pictures may be a more effective format for your visual. For some of our students, we need to use even more concrete cues, such as providing the actual object to represent the next activity or the next step in the routine. It is also important to consider the length or complexity of the visual you are creating, especially in the case of a visual schedule. For many students, it's perfectly acceptable to have a visual schedule that represents the whole day in written words. This is accessible to our students who can read and who can process that amount of information. However, some of our students may not be able to access this type of visual schedule. It may be more helpful to break down the steps into a partial day or even a single routine that is represented within the visual at any given time. You know your students best and can plan for the type of visual and the format that will best support their needs. If you find that you've created a visual support and have been implementing it without success, it is helpful to return to some of these questions and rethink how your visual support is being accessed by the student. Once your visual support is ready to go, it's helpful to think through some of these steps and considerations for teaching the new skill using the visual. For example, you will want to stand behind the learner while you're introducing visuals. Many of our students have become experts at watching our body language or nonverbal cues in order to know what to do next. To teach effectively with a visual, we want to eliminate that distraction for students, so standing behind them and prompting them to attend to the visual instead of to us can be helpful. It's also perfectly acceptable to pair the use of a visual support with a verbal prompt. Just remember to use concise, concrete statements and keep your verbal cues to a minimum. You will then assist the learner to complete the task or activity while attending to the visual, and you'll repeat this process for each step. Plan for teaching the use of the visual across different settings to support generalization. And remember, as we discussed in the prompting module, you'll want to have a plan for fading prompts as the learner gains independence. We spoke during the prompting module about fading prompts for students as an important part of the process, so that we are always working towards independence. The visual on this slide represents how visual supports may not need to be faded in order to move towards independence for a student. We have represented here the prompt hierarchy from physical to verbal to gestural to independence. The information conveyed here is that visual supports can coexist across all levels of prompting, including independence. We want to make a plan for fading our verbal, physical, or gestural prompts, but in many instances, a visual support can remain in place indefinitely if it is helpful to the student or students in successfully completing the task. If you think back to the visuals video, it is clear that, even as adults, we use many forms of visual support to navigate our daily lives, and there's no need to make a plan for fading such supports. Maintaining certain visual supports throughout our environment that hold and convey meaningful information for us frees up the cognitive load of remembering all of that information and allows more capacity for processing new learning. When implementing the use of visual supports, you always want to make sure they travel with the student. This means including visual supports in the documentation of the Behavior Intervention Plan, the Behavior Goal Planning Form, or the IEP, so that anyone working with the student or anyone new to the student is aware that a visual support is effective in helping the student successfully navigate their day. On the slide is a snapshot of the Behavior Goal Planning Form for our student James, who we have followed throughout the prompting module. The break card we are using for this student is a visual support for him. And you can see that the break card is not only mentioned within the steps and phases to teach, but also explicitly listed within the materials needed to carry out this teaching plan. One last consideration is to be very thoughtful and intentional about the visuals you place around your classroom and school. Visual supports are only effective if the student can quickly and easily locate and access the information needed. If the walls are crowded or if the sizing or location of the visual support is difficult to access, then the student won't use it. It may be helpful to take a tour of your room or teaching space and consider each visual object hanging on the wall. Does it provide essential information to a student or students? Are students using the visual to get information they need? Is this the right format for this visual? And is this the best location? If the answer to any of these questions is no, consider removing or revising the visual support. Some students are easily overwhelmed and distracted by an overstimulating visual environment. Each thing we hang in a classroom should be thoughtfully and intentionally placed. This concludes the video on visual supports. Click Next to move to the Visual Supports Knowledge Check.